Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this new chapter of the series of conversations with eminent Hispanists. This series started about 2 or almost 3 years ago. It started with one of the most well-known Hispanists, Sir John Eliot, and also who was one of the oldest living Hispanists. And now I'm very pleased to have here with us one of the youngest.
That's a frightening thought.
One of the most
I don't feel that young.
distinguished representatives of the young generation of Hispanists.
Well, thank you very much. I'm extremely pleased to be here. Very honoured to be put on the same list, even at the other end of it, as somebody like Sir John Eliot or Paul Preston or Trevor Dadson or whoever else it is.
Well, you certainly deserve to be in this list, particularly considering the very important contribution you made to the knowledge of Spain with your last book, Spain, the Centre of the World, that we will be discussing. And of course, Bob Goodwin plays a very important, a very special role in this series of Hispanists. He's an academic, but not an academic in the strict sense of the word. He likes to describe himself more as a writer. So he's a historian who writes for the general public. And of course, he's also got a very personal story to tell about his experiences in Spain. He's the only British Hispanist who speaks with an Andalusian accent, which is quite a peculiar aspect.
But very useful. Very useful.
Absolutely.
When reading 16th and 17th century documents about America, curiously enough.
I'm sure it is. So anyways, this is, as far as the introduction goes, this is where I stop, so I just want to welcome you. And just to break the ice, I would like to ask you, how did you fall in love with Spain? Why, how is it that an Englishman with no obvious connection with Spain ends up dedicating his life to the history of Spain?
Well, that's pretty easy. The summer after I left school, I travelled around Spain with a sort of backpack. Well, I didn't actually have an Interrail pass, but I might as well have had an Interrail pass. I spent more time on buses than trains, actually, for various reasons. And I had an absolutely fantastic time, and everywhere I went, everybody seemed to be smiling. And then, of course, I understood why, because they poured me a gin and tonic, and I'd never seen it. I thought it was some mistake, and the waiter fancied the girl who I was with, because the size of the gin was unimaginable compared to the sort of thing you'd got in the London pub in the 1980s. And the sun kept on shining, and the food was great, and everybody was very friendly and jolly, and I just thought, wow, what an absolutely amazing place, and what an amazing bunch of people. There must be something wrong with them. And the only way I'm going to find out is by learning to speak Spanish, and so that was sort of really how it all started, and I still haven't found anything much wrong with them. Odd complaint, but... So I think that's sort of how it all started.
Right, and of course, you were particularly interested in Andalusia and in Granada, and I was even surprised to hear that you even lived in this remote village of Granada, Jaén, like Gerald Brennan. Would you like to be described as the new Gerald Brennan?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll do anything if it gets me a gig or sells a book. But I mean, there are sort of parallels in that. So Jaén is this as they call it in Jaén, Jaén is this small village in the Sierra Nevada, in the Alpujarras, but in the unfashionable bit of the Alcohadas. I had never heard of Gerald Brennan, didn't really know what the Bloomsbury Group had been when I first turned up there, aged 19, with the idea that I was going to write a cookery book with a slightly ambitious time frame, in that was 19. I was probably 18, I was 20, it was 1990, and I thought we were going to be able to get it on the shelves in time for 1992. I know slightly more about the publishing industry now than I did then, but not that much. So I ended up living there for 3 months in harvest season, and it was a very enjoyable time. And obviously while I was there, I then got told about Gerald Brennan, and so, you know, bought one of his books or something, read it, and I have a certain sort of fraternal feeling, but you know, ultimately I like to think I'm a slightly different person to Gerald Brennan. But you know, if the day someone writes about me as another one of these Englishmen who knows us better than we know ourselves, which is the famous quote we produced about Gerald Brennan, I suppose, yeah. I don't hugely object to it. And then, yeah, to answer the question about the Moorish, the Andalusia and Granada and Seville, very quickly, my father was a specialist in Ottoman Turkey and lived in Turkey for a long time, so I think it was only natural that when I first arrived in Spain, I was interested in Islamic Spain. I mean, it was a sort of logical way to go. I've been growing out of it ever since.
Now, the Spanish press has described you as the most promising example of a new generation of Hispanists. Historians like Raymond Carr, John Elliott, created a school of historians who studied Spain as a great European nation beyond stereotypes, myths and legends. Then there is another school of so-called Hispanists, mainly novelists and travel writers, who are fascinated by Spain and are responsible for creating a romantic image of Spain, who like to describe it as an exotic country that is different to the rest of Europe. Now, which of the two schools has influenced you more?
Well, I suppose directly, as I did a PhD, my PhD thesis was about early modern Spain. Great read, Food, Art and Society in Early Modern Spain. Only PhD that is actually no, I'm joking, it's not a great read at all. It was quite fun writing it, and everybody said, "Oh, Bob, he's got a grant to go to Seville and study medieval tapas." If only. But so, formally, I was trained in, trained academically in the subject, and very much, very specifically in Golden Age Spain, in early modern Spain. By Barry Ife, who's perhaps known as B.W. Ife in his publications, who was then Cervantes professor, had the Cervantes chair next door at King's College, who is absolutely was inspirational as a teacher when I was an undergraduate. He really does write academic articles and books which are accessible to the general educated reader, and is very entertaining and very good fun as well. So I owe an enormous debt directly to Barry, but I was also enormously influenced from fairly early on in my interest in Spain by a man who became an incredibly close friend called Michael Jacobs, who very sadly died a couple of years ago, rather suddenly. And he had been in love with Spain since he was a youth, since he was 15 or 16, and had travelled much in Spain, and had an enormous number of contacts and friendships there. and he was absolutely crucial in introducing me to the reality of everyday Spain in the sort of in the 1990s, really. And he sort of he really helped me cross that cultural bridge, or manage to stride the two cultures. One of his things, one of his sort of lines was to consistently poke fun at the romantic image of Spain, whilst recognising that there are elements to it which are true. And I like to feel that I've sort of inherited some of the spirit of that. So the answer is that the Romantics did influence me, but indirectly and inversely.
Very well. Do you consider yourself? Do you like to be described as a Hispanist or?
Yeah.
There's,
you can call me what you want.
There's many Hispanists who don't like this word. For example, from John Eliot, Paul Preston, they reject this word, saying that they're just historians who work on Spain.
Well, it's wonderful to be included in this list with all these great scholars. I'm a bit of a scholar, but I'm not a great scholar by any means. And so I don't really feel that I belong in that in that sort of category. If they don't like being called Hispanists, that's their business. It strikes me that it's a useful shorthand, and that, hey, it gets you lots of space in the press in Spain if they can call you a Hispanist. It makes it much easier for them to write headlines and write captions. They can write El Hispanista, Robert Goodwin, and then they can say esta, or whatever it is, and from that point on, everybody knows. It's a very useful shorthand. So no, I don't mind at all being called a Hispanist.
Very well. Well, I disagree with what you said, that you're not a great scholar, because this is actually what we're going to be talking about now. Your last book, Spain, Center of the World, in which you really show your gifts as a scholar, and at the same time your talent to transmit the essence of this period of Spanish history, when Spain was at the center of the world. Now, this book, of course, is quite a challenge to write anything new about this great topic. What is admirable is perhaps you haven't really managed to write anything new, but you've managed to transmit the essence and make it extremely attractive to the general public, which is very much what I suppose you wanted.
Yes, no, thank you very much. That's a very wonderful stamp of approval, and that was always the point, really, from the outset. I remember, when I first started discussing with my agent, your agent, Charlie Viney, what we were doing, exactly what kind of book it was going to be, who we were going to aim it at. It was very clear from the beginning that we were going to aim at what gets called the general educated reader, so non-specialists, and that would include undergraduates, specialists in other academic fields, specialists in academics working on aspects of Spain which aren't the Golden Age, aren't the early modern period, and then professionals, sort of lawyers, doctors, who really felt they ought to know about Spain in the period when it was the biggest kid on the block, the most important country in the world, and would like one big book to take away on holiday. And so that was always the intention. I never really thought I was going to bring anything new to the Golden Age specialists, Golden Age Hispanistas. So thank you. Yeah.
Right. Now let's talk more about the book. You explain how Spain becomes the first global power by accident, but at the same time the extraordinary talent of Spaniards in the artistic world. This was certainly no accident. I mean, this is an amazing period of Spanish history. It produces from Cervantes to the greatest playwrights, architects, in all spheres of knowledge. You have a great talent there. Now, is it a coincidence that Spanish talent flourished so much at a time when Spain was a great power, or was it a consequence of this political and economic hegemony? What would you say?
I think it was definitely a consequence of it was a consequence of the money. That's money's always a great fertilizer. But you might have the seeds of talent somewhere, but if you can't subsidise it, if you can't pay for it, if you can't help people along, then the talent tends to either leave or do something else. So there's no question that the economics of it mattered. The politics of it mattered enormously as well, because the Habsburgs were. It was absolutely central to European diplomacy and European politics in the 16th and 17th century to use art, food, a whole range of cultural objects to demonstrate power and to impose power, and so there was an enormous political incentive to spend the money on doing something like that, and I think in terms of art, and particularly painting, I could go on about polychrome sculpture almost indefinitely, so I might leave that on one side for a minute. And I think polychrome sculpture is one of the great glories of early modern Spanish art that's perhaps not fully appreciated in the Anglo-Saxon world, for want of a better description. And it's at its best in procession. It's at its best when it's being carried along the street by candlelight, seen across the heads of lots of people who are there for who are there either to look at it or to have a good time or to revere it or ask it to provide them with to use it in order to connect with whichever intercessionary saint they're interested in, to give them something, to do something for them. So, as I said, I could go on about this forever, so I'll just leave it on one side. But the art, the obvious art, like Velázquez or El Greco or Zurbarán or Murillo, I think needs to be put into the context of two contexts really. One, art at the time across Europe, so I'll come back to that in a minute. But I'd actually also like to invoke an idea which is explored at great length by the brilliant Viennese art historian Ernst Gombrich, who was obviously, people may not know this, I say obviously. So the Warburg Institute was established, sort of connected to the Courtauld originally in London by the scion of the banking family, the Warburg banking family, partly as a home for his library, but partly so that Ernst Gombrich could use the library. And Gombrich came up with this, writes very, very lucidly about the concept of the beholder's share in the artistic experience. And to draw one strand out of that, I think if you think about the way in which, in the modern age, so say from the 19th century onwards, we've appreciated art, leave the contemporary of art of each generation to one side for a minute, so what we would think of as modern art, the way we've looked at art in the past has always been filtered through the Italian Renaissance. And there's no question that people like Velázquez, Zurbarán, Murillo and Greco were hugely, hugely influenced by the Italian Renaissance. And so what you get is that little, and I think Gombrich talks about this to some extent, you get that little sort of, there's enough of a variation on the paradigm for it to become that little bit more attractive. So yeah, it's the idea that the most beautiful people always have slight imperfections. You know, that real beauty happens just away from the average, from the mean. And so I think in terms of painting, what have you, and the great success, it's an incremental difference, and that's the reason. If it comes to literature, and you take particularly Miguel de Cervantes, put him in his context as well, but particularly Miguel de Cervantes, and very obviously Don Quixote, Don Quixote, that's revolutionary and quite brilliant. And yes, it depends on earlier literary models, but it's not really derivative in any sense at all. And there you are dealing with something born as much of Spain and the reality of Castile, really, is and Spain's position in the world in the late 16th, very early 17th century. And there is, you know, I do get a real sense that the extent to which it's dependent on the politics and the economics is very much at one or two removes. It's the subject matter and it's the context, but it's not, you know, Cervantes did not need, Cervantes wasn't, until much later in his life, was not the beneficiary of the economics or the politics of early modern Spain, far from it.
On the contrary, that struggled all his life.
Yeah.
Of course, there were very important decisions taken in Golden Age Spain. It's still a monarch country. One of them, for example, that I would like to comment with you, the Hispanic monarchy under Philip II had 3 natural capitals. This is very interesting when you analyze the history of Spain, because Spain is the only great European nation that has a modern capital, in the sense that it's a capital that emerges in the 16th century. At that time, there were 3 natural capitals.
We're excluding Russia from Europe, aren't we?
Well, yes, there could be more, but anyway. Actually, Moscow, yeah, more or less that time, yeah, of course.
Well, they've got 2.
Yes, fair enough. But anyway, at that time, Spain has 3 natural capitals. Spain, well, the Hispanic monarchy, that includes Portugal, Seville, Lisbon, and Barcelona, which would have been the 3 natural capitals. And yet Philip II decides to create a new capital right at the center of the Iberian Peninsula, called Madrid. This has been the subject of much historical debate. Do you think this was a good idea or a mistake from which Spain never fully recovered? This big topic, of course.
Well, I mean, you'd have to ask Madrileña whether it's a good idea. I lived in Madrid for a while and thoroughly enjoyed it, but what a climate! Oh, wonderful for about 4 months of the year, and the rest of the time. I think the parameters of the question I might slightly fiddle with the parameters of the question. I don't think you could have seriously chosen either Lisbon or Barcelona because Castile paid all the taxes. Castile paid all the taxes, and the Castilian Cortes was essential to raising taxation. And if you'd taken the capital, administrative capital, outside Castile, that probably, I don't know whether they thought about it on some committee and then realised that it was probably not going to work. So you're then left with, well, Valladolid, which was the sort of traditional proto-capital, if you like, of Spain. It's where most of the royal court spent most of its time, and the government spent most of its time for a long period. Of course, briefly, the capital did go to Valladolid at the beginning of the 17th century when the Duke of Lerimer moved it there, largely for personal reasons, and a lot of them to do with corruption. There was talk at one point of making Sanlúcar de Barrameda the capital, which I'm quite glad they didn't, because I rather liked Sanlúcar, and it would have devastated the prawn population apart from anything else, which is one of the main reasons for going there. Although it's quite nice to think of Spain being run from 1568 onwards by people who didn't stop drinking Manzanilla from breakfast onwards. It might have been a complete change in the history of Spain. Obviously the sort of more logical capital in Castile, therefore, would be more logical alternative would have been Seville. And there was a lot of entrenched interest in Seville, which mercantile interest and local landowning interest. It was a very, very powerful city already. So I can see the attraction for wanting to start again and start at Madrid. But whether it was a mistake or not, I don't think it was, probably.
Fair enough. We'll go into more details.
You can pick holes in that as much as you want.
Right. Now, the epilogue of your book, you finish off with a very melancholy quote from Miguel Marraña, which I like very much. Life is like a ship that sails quickly, leaving no trace or mark where it has been. What happened to all those earthly kings and queens who ruled the world? Where is their majesty now? Isn't this very much an explanation of the whole modern history of Spain, trying to cope with the legacy of the Golden Age and to a certain extent recreate it, but not quite manage?
Well, yeah, fair enough. Yes, I suppose the answer to the question is in the answer to the question about where are all these earthly kings and queens now? Where's all the grandeur gone? It's in the history books. It's in the dreams. It's in the mythology. It's it's become part of a sort of. It's become part of a nostalgia, or just part of history. Or part of the Black Legend, even. There's a whole this whole long story, the Black Legend. This whole sort of Northern European American concept of Spain as being essentially evil, treating behaving terribly badly in its colonies, the awful conquistadors, that sort of thing. So yes, dreams, nightmares, history, mythology. I mean, I always think that Spain lost its empire, really, its American empire, under the Bourbons. And I've always felt that that was probably to do with Bourbon centralisation and the overreach of the state. The thing about the Habsburgs is that they were a bit sort of. It was that much earlier. There was less technology by which to raise taxes and sort of order people around and organise people. So if you lived in Habsburg Spain, you had much more freedom. And I've always felt that the decline of Spain is another enormous topic that gets debated endlessly. I've always sort of felt the decline of Spain, but it still seems to be a really great country, and there's lots of money floating around in it. It's the decline of the Spanish crown, and that was because the Habsburgs were spending so much money in creating, well, in order to be able to spend lots of money on their foreign wars, they created a very unstable monetary economy, and so naturally people fled from the monetary economy, or they kept their silver and gold under their beds, and so there was it doesn't mean that Spain wasn't wealthy in that Habsburg period. It's just that the Habsburg monarchy was in terrible decline. Then the Bourbons came along, and over the course of the 18th century were able to get a real grip on the Spanish economy, and they were able to tax people and organise people, and there were all these sort of government initiatives to set up towns with Germans in the middle of La Mancha. I mean, that was a great idea. A load of people who were used to this sort of damp, cold climate and drinking beer were suddenly stuck in the middle of one of the hottest places of the world. Guess what they did? They drank wine like it was beer. It didn't work. So I exaggerate, obviously, but there's this. So there was a lot of statist intervention. And what happened? The statist intervention in the colonies in America actively turned the colonists into, it turned the what are called the criollos, the sort of elite Spaniards who they considered themselves to be Spanish, but they were basically an elite within the American economies, within Peru, Mexico. They turned around and they said, well, why should we give you all our money? We can very happily run our economies for ourselves. And the lag between between the colonial independence and serious examples of Bourbon government imposition in each colony. I mean, it's almost the same in each case.
So you think there wouldn't have been with the Habsburgs, that wouldn't have happened?
Well, I don't know, because as I say, it may just be to do with technology, and it's also to do with fashions in politics. I mean, it was the idea was the whole concept of free trade within an empire was very current in Enlightenment thinking. So the notion that the Habsburgs would have been immune to the currents in Enlightenment thinking is probably a bit far-fetched, but we're now entering that sort of murky world of the history that might have been. But ultimately, it was the Bourbons who established this really solid empire. And if you've been wandering around bits of the empire in the second half of the 18th century, you'd never have thought it was all about to collapse, because it all looked quite, solid. The idea of the loss of empire, and the idea of the greatness Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure really.
Let me ask you another question about the legacy of the empire. That takes us to a very interesting subject, which is your next book, because obviously the legacy of the Spanish Empire is much more enduring than that of many empires. If we consider, for example, aspects like the language that spreads throughout America, and also Spain had deep marks in North America as well, and this is linked to the origins of the United States, which is actually the subject of your next book. Can you tell us about this? What is so special about the role of Spain in the origins and the history of the United States, and why do we know so little about this?
Well, I'm still writing the book, so I promise to come back and talk and answer the first part of your question when I know it, when I've got a better idea. Why we know so little about it is fascinating, and so I should preface this with a caveat, which is that there's a lot of good work being done for many years in the United States locally, and there are a handful of over the decades, there have been a handful of Mexican historians particularly who've done very interesting work on the subject, and so that's the caveat, if you like, that prefaces what comes next. And basically, we don't know very much about it because for Spain, it wasn't the most important part of the empire at all, and the Spanish obviously left the scene, left the stage very early on. So for Spanish historians, there's always been other things which have been much more interesting. Then for Mexicans, it's a tragic embarrassment, because most of it was Mexican until the Mexican-American War and the Gadsden Purchase in the middle of the 19th century. And so it would be writing the history of a part of the world that had been successfully, at least to some extent, successfully part of the Spanish Empire until 1821, had then been Mexican. Well, in the case of Texas, it was barely Mexican before the Texans took it back, and then obviously it was absorbed into the United States, and then there's the Mexican-American War, and all of what we now think of as California, Alta California, New Mexico, Arizona. So if you're a Mexican, why would you want to write about that? I mean, you'd have to be really, really depressed. And then, and so you're then left with the, if you like, the classic Anglo North American history, in which the West is meant to be a wilderness into which the settlers could move. But what an inconvenient wilderness it was, because of course in reality it was full of Native Americans, and a lot of people who had been Spanish, in many cases had been Spanish, then Mexican, and now become American. And they had their own legal system, and they had title deeds to their land, and they owned farms, and they had businesses, and so they slightly get in the way. They get in the way of the American mythology, and therefore, apart from some of these great local North American historians, and many of them actually who wrote their big narrative histories of Spanish and then Mexican North America in the 19th century and early 20th century, people like Herbert Bolton, or researchers, anthropological researchers, like there's a Swiss American called Adolfo, how do we say it? Adolphus Bandelier, in New Mexico. Yeah, so these guys took a serious interest and wrote some very serious history, but it doesn't really fit the North American paradigm, and so therefore nobody's really been interested in trying to write a broad sweeping account of all of it, because it just doesn't quite fit with anybody's history.
Right. Now, before I open the floor so we can have a couple of questions from the audience, let me switch to contemporary Spain and ask you one striking aspect of Spain, particularly over the last years, is that despite this great past and this amazing the legacy of Golden Age Spain, Spaniards seem to be among the most critical of the country and their historical legacy. In fact, according to European opinion polls over the last years, Spain, together with the Italians, were the most critical of their nations. How do you explain this?
Well, there's an obvious question to ask, which is that a bad thing?
Not necessarily.
And I suspect that it isn't.
On the other hand, the French appear as the most proud of the nation, which is interesting.
Well, plus ça change. But I mean, I think you could probably. I hate this question. I've been asked it 101 times, but I think you could, and I've experimented with various answers. My latest experiment, my latest hypothesis is that actually it probably shows that the Spanish education system is working, because after all, critical ability, and the ability to criticise yourself is one of the things that when I've worked in education, it's one of the things that you try and instill in your students, self-reflection, and the ability to question all sorts of aspects of whatever it is that you're studying, or that whatever it is that interests you. So in that sense, I think the answer is that it's rather healthy if Spaniards are criticising Spain, and as long as it doesn't turn into as long as it doesn't turn into some sort of bizarre nihilism, I don't see why it matters. I mean, at the same time, if you go to Spain and you hang out with some Spaniards, they're incredibly enthusiastic about showing you the latest tapas bar that's got some extraordinary thing involving with these. At the moment, it all seems to be to do with foie gras, and it's got to be parred on something, and there's a bit of leek on it, or leek jam, or and they take you to this place which is in the middle of nowhere, and there's some special wine which has just been biodynamically produced in a tiny plot of land. There's real enthusiasm for things Spanish as well. So I think I'm not. I think it's all rather healthy.
Right. On the other hand, of course, Hemingway described Spain as the last great country, something like that, because of the joie de vivre, the generosity, the passion for life.
Because of the size of the gin and tonics, no.
In fact, it's that it was the only country where you had to say that's enough when they're serving you a glass of wine. That's very important. Now, would you say, is this still the case in your experience?
He really never learned how to say, but basta, I was going to say, of course, bastante. But, sorry.
Yeah, would you say this is still the case, or is this a cliche that only applies to certain regions or certain characters?
There's some, yes, goodness. Yes, if I'm indifferent to being associated with Gerald Brennan and feel that I'm not exactly in the same business as all these eminent Hispanists, please don't associate me with this anyway. But no, I think Spain. I genuinely think, yes, neatly back to where we started. The reason I'm here, the reason I wrote that book, the reason I did Spanish at university, the reason, so for most of my existence since I was about 20 years old, has been the fact that I just find Spaniards really buena gente, good fun, good people. They're good, they're good blokes and blokettes, or whatever the ghastly word is. They're really. That's not to say that I'm under any illusion that everybody's sort of incredibly noble and honourable and honest, and there are many. Spaniards are people, and Spain is not heaven. But I just, the way of doing things on a daily basis, the ease, the sort of, it's so relaxed, it's easygoing, relaxed, friendly, fun. It's
what else do you need?
Yes, I mean it's just a lovely country and filled with very, very lovely people.
Great to hear that. Now let's open the floor and let's give the opportunity to the audience to ask any question or query.
Go on. Yes.
Talking about buena gente, what do you think of the political class in Spain right now, for the last 10 years?
Well, I have to say I spent most of the last 10 years in this country for one reason or another, and so I haven't had much to do with the current Spanish crop of politicians. I'm not sure that they're any worse or any better than anybody else's politicians. Although I appreciate that when they're your politicians, your enthusiasms or your criticisms might be slightly, will be one more nuanced, but also probably more ferocious.
More questions? Yes.
Could I ask, what is your sense of the push towards regionalism versus centralism in Spain? Not just in Catalonia, but elsewhere.
But generally, well, I mean, there's a long history of Spain being, it's a composite country in the way that Great Britain is a composite country, composed of various nations, various historic nations, and that was very much reflected in the way the Constitution was drafted. And then, I mean, what's interesting, I suppose, and at this point, probably be almost better if Julio answered this question, as he knows more about it than I do. I mean, at the time of the implementation of the Constitution, when the different autonomous regions emerged, am I right in thinking they voted? There were regional referendums on the extent of, there were different ways in which you could become an autonomous region. Am I right in thinking? So, I mean, this is very much written into the regionalism is written into the Constitution, right? As well, so we're reflecting the history. And therefore, I suppose it's. I mean, is it fair to say it's an essential? It's basic part of the socio-political landscape. Yeah, fair enough.
Absolutely.
Yes. So I think that's that's the context, and so you're bound to get anything that's fundamentally part of a socio-political landscape will have it will rise and fall in importance according to the fashion, for the political fashions of the time, the current economic situation, who the leaders are of the different, who the different leaders are. I would have said.
More questions? Yes, gentleman in the back, you will be given
following on from that, you heard a lot about the Basques, the Catalans, the Madrileños. They're very good at proclaiming themselves. The Andalusians, the unsung heroes of Spain.
Absolutely, without unquestionably, they maintain traditions and approaches. There's some other parts, other parts of Spain can only dream of hanging on to, and therefore there is a sort of quintessential Andalusness and Andalusianness, which, frankly, is fantastic. Thank you for the question.
It's a pity we don't have more people from Andalusia here, but I'm sure at some stage you will be made an honorary citizen of Granada.
Well,
really deserve it.
Thank you. Yes, honorary citizenship of any citizenship that's gained. No.
Yes, more questions. Yes, Silva.
What could the United Kingdom learn about maintaining traditions from Spain or Andalusia?
What do you mean without reference to recent troubles in Gibraltar? I mean, okay. What does the United Kingdom learn about? Well, there's this huge debate over where fish and chips came from, and there are two very clear schools of thought. One is that it was brought by Jewish refugees from pogroms in sort of Lithuania and Russia, and therefore the first fish and chips, as it were, all happened on the East Coast in the 19th century. And the other theory is the tradition grew up more slowly, and it was brought by sherry merchants from the south of Spain, and that actually fish and chips originates with Andalusia. And so, for the sake of brevity in answering your question, I'm going to put my vote down with the Andalusian version of the fish and chips. Let's face it, none of these things are ever mutually exclusive. I'm going to put my vote down with the Andalusian version of fish and chips, and suggest that the Great British Fish and Chips and its tradition has been not only originated in Andalusia, but is kept alive in by far its most palatable form in Andalusia as well.
By the expats.
One more question. Yes. Talking about just wait for the microphone, please.
Yeah, talking about food in Andalusia.
Yes.
How do you describe? How do you characterize it compared to other regions in Spain, like Galicia or Catalonia?
Well, Andalusian food you can characterise by being fresh and fried, or old and cured. Old and cured. Can anybody think what I'm talking about? Well, not that old. Yes, jamón ibérico. So I mean, I think you can. Yeah. So those are the crucial elements in Andalusian food. I would have said that the fresh ingredients and somebody wants to add something.
Yes.
I was going to say that jamón comes from Extremadura.
Well, jamón comes from Extremadura, Huelva. The jamones of Treveneth are very famous. It comes from Salamanca as well, Catalonia. Well, I mean, yeah, it's Parma ham, of course, but shh, I didn't say that. Yeah, so jamón is very characteristic of Andalusia. Personally, my favourite jamón, I think, probably comes from Cazalla de la Sierra, although don't tell that to the people in Aracena, which is where I often spend my summer holidays.
Anyway, before we finish off, there's two questions that I always ask to people invited to this series. First of all is, in your view, who are the three most important people in the history of the Spanish-speaking world? I have to mention three.
Well, that's easy. Pedro, David Azpilicueta, and Diego Costa. Guess which football team I support. And the... Sorry, is that too flippant an answer? Okay.
So I've won.
Sorry, Pedro. There you are. It is too flippant an answer, isn't it? There's Pedro and Azpilicueta are two different people.
Right.
Okay. But anyway, okay. But if there's anybody else I'm going to add to that list, it would very obviously be Miguel de Cervantes, who is my greatest hero of all time.
Great, that's always a very safe bet here. And finally, what is, in your view, the most important legacy of Spain in the world?
Well, obviously, the language. And anybody who wants Spanish language lessons is in absolutely the right place. Urge your friends to sign up. Here we are, in the Instituto Cervantes, and this is the best place, by far the best place in London to learn Spanish, and in fact it's where I started many moons ago.
So this is a very good example.
And I can strongly recommend it.
Okay, well that's a very, again, that's a classic answer.
They do their brainwashing well.
Very well, okay, we'll have to leave it here. It's been a great pleasure to have you here, and very enjoyable to talk about Golden Age Spain and Spain in general. And we'll be delighted to continue this conversation with a glass of wine. Unfortunately, I don't think we have a ham or
well, do we have any fish and chips?
Or any Andalusian delights, but I think a glass of wine is the way of culminating this great.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask for a quick round of applause for Julio as well, who has been running the Cervantes Institute for a number of years now, absolutely brilliantly. He's been, a truly fabulous director, but before too long he will be moving on, and I think the person here who definitely needs a round of applause is Julio. So can we have them very much?
Last but not least, those of you interested in, those of you who haven't read Bob's book, we have it, well, ideally you should buy it.
Available at all good bookshops and on Amazon.
Yeah. If you don't buy it, you should join this library and borrow it. This is something that you should do.
Which won't do you any good because Julio's got it out.
Very well. Okay, let's go and have a glass of wine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great.